Good evening from Bandung, Indonesia, for all participants worldwide. I think so far already registered 150s. And thank you to Climate Group for hosting this event. Currently, Indonesia, India, South Africa, Brazil, and the EU are carrying out international collaborative research led by the German Institute for Economic Research, or DIW Berlin, for 4 years, from 2019 until 2023, with the topic Strengthening National Climate Policy Implementation, Comparative Empirical Learning, and Creating Linkage to Climate Finance, or is called as SNAPFI. This research consortium aims to spot the implementation of nationally determined contribution, or NDCs, in each country by providing input on national policies, including funding policies related to climate change. In the 4 years of this research project, 2022-2023, the consortium seeks to reflect on the relationship between international funding and climate policy making processes in developing countries by evaluating the role of bilateral and multilateral donors in climate change agenda setting, formulation, decision-making, or implementation of national public policies, which spots the alignment of financial flows with climate change and mitigation effort, as well as how stakeholders at the national level encourage domestic policies to increase financial flows for climate change mitigation and adaptation, including identifying the most effective financial instrument in financing climate change. During this Climate Week 2023, the SNAPFI team, including Manish Srivastava from TERI, India, Niken Prilandita from Climate Change Center of ITB Indonesia, Andrew Mercot from UCT South Africa, Gustavo from FGV Brazil, also Heiner von Lubke from DIW Germany, will discuss their brand new research live from Indonesia. Tune in to discover how researchers from Indonesia, India, South Africa, Brazil, and also EU are working together to explore how transformative change can be enabled by international climate finance through domestic policies in developing countries. In India, we have industry decarbonization finance. In Indonesia, we have governance aspect related to the energy and climate policy areas. In South Africa, we have just energy transition finance. In Brazil, we have an overcoming investment hurdle in the sustainable transport sector. And in EU perspective, we have the international cooperation dimension of climate finance and industry, energy, and land use sectors. This section will be moderated by Pak Budi from Climate Change Center of ITB. Pak Budi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Pak Joko. Good night from Indonesia, and have a nice discussion with us. So today we have, as Pak Joko mentioned, we have 5 panelists, and then we will starting for India case study, and Manish will be present of this research. Manish, time is yours.
Thank you, Bodhi, and I'm glad to be here. What I would be briefly talking about is this question of financing just transition. More I think about it, I find that the navigating through this question of what is justice and how it gets interposed with the complex processes of just transition of energy transition is something that's a complex problem. but financing has always been concerned about the additionality that comes to developmental process with climate action. So I'll share a few thoughts that emerge from our current work on this theme. Next slide, please. So the scale of justice is in the context of climate finance is, in very simple terms, has been this, that the focus of domestic policy is to look after the developmental priorities broadly covered as the special national circumstances, improving the quality of life of people. That has been the priority of domestic policy of every country, but categorically has been decided that agreed as a overriding priority of developing countries. So international climate finance would play an important role in providing for the additional costs of climate action, meaning in addition to achieving developmental goals, if you also want to achieve climate goals, then it would add to the cost, and that should come from international climate finance. So that kind of a balancing has to be done. Higher the developmental pressures, higher the need for international climate finance in developing countries. So we are at a juncture where I think we would have to think about these two in a synonymous and more synchronized manner, where developmental policies and climate terms developmental transition process. And in that, the international climate finance should not only be concerned with the additional cost of technological transition, but also addressing the negative impacts of climate measures Hello, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you, Manish.
Sorry for the technical glitch. So I was just giving a context of energy transition required in Indian context. Of course, this is a result of modeling study. Different modeling studies have different numbers, but broadly the story is that about 8 to 10 folds increase in solar capacity would be required in next 30 years, 20 folds increase in wind capacity. We would need to triple gas-based power, which would basically imply we would have to rely more and more on import. And of course, double bioenergy. And this would be necessary to reduce the reliance on coal. And this also would need to be supported by electrification of transport sector, energy efficiency in buildings and industry, and also probably some degree of negative emission technologies would need to be deployed. Next. So the cost estimates for this transition range widely. They range from $10 trillion to $113 trillion from different sources, depending on how the costs are calculated, what is covered under the cost of transition. Now, looking at the developmental challenges due to this transition, there are many, but I want to focus on three specific aspects. One is the dominant debate about just transition of in the context of labor force. So about 10 million people are employed in the fossil fuel value chain. So transition away from fossil fuels would mean that we will need to think about the livelihood of that many families, at least. There is also an issue of spatial inequality. For example, there are there is 25% of Indian population lives in 18% of total districts, which depend exclusively almost on fossil fuel centric economy. So a transition away from fossil fuels would imply, or coal specifically, would imply that we would be subjecting this 25% population to a future of uncertainty that needs to be compensated. And well, from the planning point of view, one can say that the good thing is that it's only concentrated in 4 states. So 4 comprehensive plans in those states could help, but that is easier said than done. Because states rely a lot on coal-based revenues. If we look at the government revenues, 19% of central government revenues, 9% of state government revenues come from fossil fuel industry. Just Coal India alone, which is responsible for coal mining, contributes about $1 billion USD per year to public exchequer. So that gives the context of financial needs and the negative impacts that we need to worry about if the transition has to be a just transition. Next slide, please. So basically, the dilemma that we face is that transition needs more public resources, also to mobilize private finance, encourage private finance. But that need for public resources increases multifold if we want to make the transition just. So that there is an additionality of resource requirement. But we also see that if the immediate impact, at least, of transition measures is that it reduces the availability of domestic public finance. So these two implications go into opposite directions. How do we turn the tide is really the question, and where finance would need to play a role. We need to rethink about finance. Next slide, please. And if we look at what the current situation is, we find that domestic policy needs international climate finance at scale now in order to meet the needs of just transition, but that's not happening. For example, if we look at India's domestic policy on steel, India plans to add 150 MTPD capacity by 2030. That is doubling the existing capacity. Now, if all that additional capacity has to be green steel, using green hydrogen and all, the cost is in excess of USD 300 billion, which would otherwise be 90 billion in the current practice. Or if we look at just the incremental solutions to improve energy efficiency within the existing MSMEs in the steel sector, that alone is $10 billion, which is a bigger number than the South African JETP. So that gives the scale of mismatch. It's my final slide. Next, please. So some conclusions. I think, well, just transition needs more public money, domestic and international combined. And so the transition has to be a vehicle of growth as well as increased fiscal capacity of domestic governments, national governments. And also, in order for that to happen, cost of transition has to be net negative. This would require that upfront high costs must be paid at scale with lower cost of capital. And international climate finance needs to be re-envisioned as an extended domain of fiscal capacity of national governments. And I think that is the most important political agenda that should be on table from India's point of view when we discuss or debate the new collective quantified goal on climate finance in the coming COP. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Manis, for a very interesting presentation. Talk about the dilemma, how we can utilize international climate finance in the energy transition in India. Now we can continue with Indonesian case that will be present by Ibu Niken. Ibu Niken, time is yours.
Yes, thank you, Pak Budi. Good day, good evening from Indonesia. My name is Niken and I'm representing our team from the Climate Change Center of Bandung Institute of Technology. Today I will talk about the 4th year of our research study entitled Climate Energy Governance Model in Indonesia. So this is our last study, year study, and we are converting our topic into climate governance in energy sector. Next, please. Yeah. So as the background, I would start our presentation by looking at the Indonesia's commitment to climate change. We already submitted our enhanced NDC. The number is strengthened to almost 32% unconditional and up to 43% with international support. And Indonesia also has a target to become net zero emission by 2060, or even some analysts said it can be achieved sooner. And for the energy mix nationally, we try to achieve 23% in the renewable energy mix in 2025, or even 31% in 2050. And as looking at the climate energy profile of Indonesia, maybe almost the same with India. We are mostly rely on coal or fossil fuel. For example, the emission reduction up until 2019 has only reached half of the target of 24%. And the renewable energy share in energy mix reached 10% last year, while the coal is increased to 42%. And it has been a similar trend for the past 11 years. The primary energy supply is still dominated by coal. And then this is probably, we try to look at the situation in Indonesia, its unique position. We call this energy trilemma. There's three obligations of the state to provide the energy needs, and also there's a commitment to reduce emission. And at the same time, because of the various energy resources we have, there's also obligation to maintain the energy sovereignty. So this trilemma is cause the policy and the roadmap for the energy transition in Indonesia tend to be quite relaxed. So all in all, we think that in the current situation, Indonesia has set ambitious emission reduction targets, but actually the achievement was relatively stagnant or slow. So the focus of our study for the past 4 years, we try to propose a climate governance framework in Indonesian energy sector. We hope that this framework, we can see the strategy to accelerate the achievement of the climate targets, including NDC and NZA. Next, please. To understand, to improve the Indonesian climate energy governance, we try to understand the system first. So based on our literature review, we propose and formulate a climate governance framework. It consists of 4 components or 4 dimensions, such as key actors or institutions, key policies, and then policy processes that try to look at the way the policy is formulated, especially in energy sector, and then the financing aspect. Yeah, next, please. So based off from our analysis through an in-depth interviews with quite a number of sources, these are the results and findings for each of the dimensions. For the key actors or institution dimensions, we found out that in the energy and climate sector, there are several actors, several prominent actors that we have identified, such as Ministry of National and Development Planning, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, and then the Energy National Council, or DEN. However, in the based on our analysis for the energy sector, we found that the Ministry of Energy and the DEN is the most influential within the network. And we also found that there are sectoral ego and several policies that published by each ministry are still separated and not integrated well with the Indonesian development agenda. For the second dimension, we examine several policies such as enhanced NDC, and then the National Energy Grant Strategy, and the National Energy Master Plan, and National Electricity Master Plan. And we see that based on this policy, the energy-related policies tend to slow the energy transition process. There's a high proportion of coal in the energy mix projection rather than the renewable energy. And of course, this is the political commitment remains highly crucial in maintaining the energy mix. Yeah, next slide, please. The third dimension regarding the formulation of the policy, the process of promulgating certain policies and regulation is still carried by the informal practice. There's emergence of politically exposed person in the energy policy making, and then the informality caused large discrepancies between the Indonesian government's pledge to NDC, the national pledge, and the program acted to achieve it. In terms of financing, the last dimension, actually we found that Indonesia still faces obstacles in closing the gap between finance availability and required finance to meet the renewable energy target by 2025. There's the numbers that we provide here to support this statement. All in all, financing for the new and renewable energy projects in Indonesia is still limited, even though in the energy mix, the new and renewable energy is intended to be the first contributor to the GHG emission reduction. And of course, the alternative and innovative financing sources are still needed to aid the Indonesia's energy transition. Okay, next please. Based on these results, there are several concluding remarks. First is we examine that in terms of key actors, the enhancement of the Energy National Council roles is important within the Indonesian Climate Energy Network, because the institution is vital in advising the president and also the ministries. And then the energy policy trajectory is still in the favor of fossil fuel rather than the renewable energy, although we can see that in the upcoming presidential election, it could be a good policy window to shift that. And to date, there's a new Renewable Energy Act is still being formulated. It can be seen as a commitment towards a just transition. And also there's a problem of informality in the energy policy making that's slowing down the low carbon energy target. And the last one would be the innovative climate financing is essential to close the gap between climate finance and the required funds to achieve the NDC target. I think that's all that I can present. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bu Niken, for a comprehensive presentation about the climate energy model. Yeah, this is a bit different with South Africa. India mentioned about the financing. Now we can continue with South Africa, country study that Andrew will present. Andrew, time is yours.
Many thanks. Just need the presentation. on the screen. In the meantime, maybe just to say that our fourth year study in this project is focusing on the Just Energy Transition Partnership that was announced at COP26, followed by a more detailed Just Energy Transition Investment Plan that was released just before COP27. The next slide, please. The conceptual approach that we used for this was based on international relations, conceptual framework developed by Putnam in the 80s, and we've added to that a bit. But the idea is basically to look at the interaction between the national policy and planning process and the international climate regime, and see how these are interacting. Next slide, please. Yeah. So a few factors that are currently determining where the JETP is going in South Africa, having now almost 2 years after the announcement. First of all, though, we're in the middle of an electricity crisis, and that the electricity sector in South Africa produces almost half of our greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also the sector where we have the most mitigation potential until at least until 2030, and also beyond that. In addition to that, there are other sectors such as transport, industrial sectors, and a few others that we would need the electricity sector to decarbonize faster in order to decarbonize those sectors going into the future. The electricity crisis is both a potential obstacle, but also a very big opportunity for what we have in mind at the moment for the just transition. There are some other stresses. The economy has been growing at a very sluggish rate. There are very severe development challenges in the form of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, which are structural and inherited from the apartheid era, which need to be part of any kind of solution. There is an additional complication around party politics and who in the ruling party and elsewhere across the political domain supports an ambitious climate outcome, as opposed to being very concerned about potential job losses in the coal sector. Climate and energy policy is at the moment, there are some very sharp divergences on this, which are unresolved. The one vision for climate and energy policy is articulated in the JET-IP, and that involves accelerating the scaling down of electricity generation by the coal fleet owned by a national utility. And then that would also be dependent, obviously, in initiating a very large-scale renewable energy program. The other more conservative view on this is that we're in a situation at the moment which is very risky because we don't have energy security. We have a lot of load shedding at the moment, which is also hindering economic growth. And that, I mean, the view around that narrative is basically that we should not really take that kind of risk at the moment, but rather concentrate on fixing the existing system. This is still unresolved, and we're still looking at the options that will come out of this. The Southern government is about to publish a new integrated resource plan. So that will resolve some of this uncertainty. Some of the new developments that surround the JET-P in the last 4 years, we have a Presidential Climate Commission which emerged from a job summit in 2018 organized by the president. And there was a very strong push by the union movement to found such a commission and really look at climate change and climate change mitigation and adaptation across the whole economy. And the just transition is a central part of the mandate that the Presidential Climate Commission has. The advantage of the Climate Commission is that because it's relatively independent, but also chaired by the president, it can achieve the type of coordinated policy making that is very difficult in line departments. And it is very successfully augmenting the efforts of the current Department of Environment, who are responsible for climate change policy. The other background to this was there is a compelling evidence base around the benefits and co-benefits of an accelerated transition, and there are some conditions attached to that. These are that these types of policies would need to be accompanied by a set of complementary policies around the just transition, which would include industrial policy and a number of other development objectives. There has been, as with other countries, a massive shift in the price of new renewable energy technologies versus new coal. New RE is now about a third of the price of new coal, if you look at that in South Africa. Even slightly more than that if you consider the whole of system costs. But it is by far the cheapest option at the moment, and that's a very different situation from where we were 10 years ago. We've also discovered that there are enormous resources available. Then finally, the context for the JET-P is really the updated NDC and from 2021, which was developed just before the JET-P, and the long-term low emission strategy submitted by South Africa to the UN, and also it also has a provisional net zero target. Next slide, please. So on the international stage, at the time that we made this announcement, and probably also even more now, the world is obviously off track meeting our mitigation targets in relation to the temperature goal. There is a lot of mistrust across the climate regime. And then, so one of the things that really worked in the advantage of the JET-P was that COP26 needed to deliver good news on climate finance. And this is an innovative option, which is potentially a way of scaling up climate finance. Next slide, please. The next stage in the JET-P was the development of an investment plan, which is very detailed. It's publicly available, and that achieved a number of things. I mean, first of all, it outlined South Africa's requirements for investment for its NDC and beyond that. It highlighted that the amount of finance on the table for the JET-P was only really the first phase of that implementation, and that we need to solve that problem of how to access further tranches of finance to finance the transition. The plan itself is also effectively making policy in the sense that it is a very integrated plan across all the various policy requirements for the transition, and this is the first time they've all been in one place. And that is, I think, pushing the policy making process along around the just transition. Next slide, please. So the results so far of the work that we're doing on this is that, first of all, there is a lot of value in having an integrated, coherent whole economy implementation plan. This is not perfect, and it will probably be revised as we go. but it does put everything in one place, and it clearly shows the coordination between different elements in the plan. There are very complex and difficult trade-offs that need to be made, and very difficult decisions that government needs to make about policy. And these are probably relevant to almost every other developing country, which highlights the importance of support. Evidence and detailed evidence around the short and long-term unfolding of the transition is very important. Building cross-cutting coalitions, which manage to crowd in everyone who has an interest in making part of the policy package that will make this all work successfully, and particularly in the sustainable development context, is critical. And lastly, the most difficult part of this, I think, is implementing the just transition programs that need to support this. And these are very highly diverse, decentralized, and they range from welfare and household issues like electricity access all the way up to industrial policy. And that focusing on this, I think, is very important. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. This is perfect time and nice here to South Africa cross-country study presentation about the just energy transition partnership. Yeah, we can hear some problem, we can hear some opportunity. So the next presenter is Gustavo from FGP Brazil. Will present about the Brazil country study. Gustavo, time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm going to talk briefly about Brazil's national biofuel policy, and more focused on the legislative process behind it and what kind of lessons we can perhaps extract from other climate relevant sectoral policies, not only in Brazil, but perhaps elsewhere. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of context, although most of Brazil's greenhouse gas emissions come from land use change, mostly due to illegal deforestation, if we look at energy-related greenhouse gas emissions, nearly half of it comes from the transportation sector, even more so if we account for fuel production. And that's because, well, in one hand, Brazil has a fairly clean electricity matrix, and on another hand, Brazil has great reliance on road transportation to move cargo and passengers across the country. So there's a need to shift that transportation matrix towards more low carbon infrastructure, low carbon means of transportation, as well as increase the use of low carbon fuels and biofuels specifically. And for that to happen, and particularly for the investments in those sectors to be unlocked, there's a need for a conducive regulatory framework in place to attract private financial flows towards those sectors and those projects. And in this sense, Brazil's national biofuel policy presents an interesting case for us to look at, not only because it was the first policy, that national policy, to explicitly attempt to contribute for Brazil to achieve its climate change goals under the Paris Agreement. It was also a policy, almost a unique case, we could say, of a very fast approval of a policy in Congress, that from the presentation of the draft bill to it being voted and approved in both houses of Congress took less than 1 month. And that's an interesting case for us to look at and perhaps draw lessons to other sectoral but climate relevant policies in Brazil. So next slide, please. So just a bit of more of an academic kind of slide. The questions that we tried to answer in our report this year was, well, essentially drawing on Kingdom's multiple streams framework. What are the major forces at work during the legislative process of Renova, Brazil's national biofuel policy? It's not necessary for me here to explain the framework per se. It's just a way for us to organize the information and come up with our research propositions. And the second one, it's how were climate change concerns incorporated into the policy process. I'm just going to briefly say that we looked at, we analyzed more than 100 newspaper articles talking about the policy and official documents talking about the policy, as well as we conducted interviews with actors from the government, from civil society, from biofuel producers, and from fuel distributors to understand a little bit of how those things happened and why the outcome was what it was. Next slide, please. So I brought here more generic research propositions that come from Brazil's national biofuel policy case, and I'm going to try to relate those and explain those to you. I'm just going to briefly say that Brazil's national biofuel policy has a goal of helping Brazil to achieve its climate change commitments under the Paris Agreement. It also seeks to improve energy security in the country. It also seeks to create more stable market conditions for biofuel production to happen in the country. So this mix of multiple problems being tackled by a single policy proposal seems to have helped in achieving an environment where you had a large coalition of players supporting it and securing and fighting for it to be approved, which happened in a fast manner. Although there are concerns about the lack of priority between those multiple problems that are being tackled by a single policy. And perhaps a lesson to be extracted here is in future endeavors, multiple problems can be tackled by a single policy, but they probably need a clear priority in order for implementation to happen more smoothly. Secondly, the case of Brazil's national biofuel policy is a case where multiple so-called policy entrepreneurs, according to our framework, to Kingdom's framework, have acted in different stages of the policy process. They have invested their time, their resources, their networking, their capabilities to negotiate in order to ensure that a large coalition was behind this proposal. And that also tended to help the policy process to go faster than usual and to encounter less opposition than usual. So this existence of multiple policy entrepreneurs inside the government and outside of the government seem to have an important effect into ensuring that the policy is not only supported, but also that it happens in a fast and speedy way, that perhaps it's urgent, it's necessary to tackle climate change and to deal with other problems similarly. And then in the third proposition, this idea or this notion of tackling climate change through a sectoral policy and explicitly tying sectoral policies to climate change and even framing a sectoral policy as a climate policy made Brazil's national biofuel policy more visible, particularly in the media and international discussions, and it also decreased public opposition to the policy. So obviously, likely sources of opposition to a biofuel policy were fossil fuel distributors, and the fact that it's not only a biofuel policy, but it's also a climate change policy made it more costly to be vocal against it and to be publicly seen as opposing a policy that has a climate change component to it. That is also something that can be perhaps extracted to similar efforts in other areas in transportation policy in Brazil. And finally, the adoption of a market-based approach, which is included in Brazil's national biofuel policy, also contributed to it being more acceptable by private sector players, particularly, again, the fossil fuel distributors that have mandatory targets to comply, but they can comply by purchasing decarbonization credits in a market environment. However, if a market-based approach is the way to go in other areas, it's important to take into consideration the best practices commonly found in other regulated environmental markets in order to make that market-based approach effective, which is not necessarily the case with Brazil's national biofuel policy, and that has led to some implementation challenges that will probably need to be addressed in the future. So these are generalizable lessons from in a specific policy, and then I would say that as next steps until the end of the project, we're going to be looking at also with a similar methodological approach and a similar framework at statewide REDD+ policies in the Amazonian states, as well. We're going to do a little bit of a comparison between this year's report on the Brazil's national biofuel policy and the previous year report on Brazil's maritime cabotage statute that took a longer period to be approved and did not make that connection with climate change as visible, and faced a lot of public opposition. And perhaps we can contrast those results and make it even clearer lessons for other sectoral policies with climate relevance for Brazil and other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. It's nice presentation we hear about the current situation in Brazil in biofuel technology and financing. Last but not at least, we can hear from a perspective that will present by Henner. Henner, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak Budi. I'm going to present the fourth of a series of studies that the DIW has led on the cooperation element, the international cooperation elements in which international climate finance could be implemented. So this year we looked at the international climate finance and how it interacts with national policy processes, and we draw on evidences that we collected through interviews from public and private climate finance in the land use and forestry sectors of Brazil. Next one, please. So I think it's quite obvious that there is a necessity to cooperate internationally on climate policy, but the question is how, given that under the Paris Agreement, most countries are doing efforts on their own, including there are countries where the climate problem becomes very evident, such as in Brazil's biomes that are under the deforestation pressures. And currently under the new government, there is international willingness to cooperate. But the question emerges, like, what approaches for international cooperation will work? Then the other background is here that there is, of course, this controversial discussion and theme of broken trust of international climate finance, Article 9 Paris Agreement, about the insufficient amounts, unclear relationship with ODA, official development assistance, critique of northern influence seeking or patronization, or public versus private finance. So we selected on the basis of this background two types of these climate finance actors. One is the climate finance actor that is implemented on the basis of official development assistance. We call it the ODA ICF. And the other, which is a novel form, that's a private form of finance, a policy engagement process that is the investors' policy engagement on environment and deforestation. Next one, please. So we wanted to know in this study what roles do these public, the ODA-based, and the private, which is the investor-led climate finance actors, play in domestic policy processes. We looked at, as mentioned, in Brazil's land use sectors, and especially with a view to the implementation of the national law forest code. And we wanted to know what are the potentials of such processes and the actors that work in these policy processes, and what are the challenges. And of course, we wanted to learn about what are options to enhance or improve international cooperation that way. It was a single case study of Brazil, and we did 32 semi-structured interviews with a variety of actors there. Next one. So this analytical framework includes factors coming from the international sphere. And the basic logic is here, the assumption is that these international factors interact with domestic factors in what we see here in the middle of this figure in the interaction area, so that both of these types, the finance actor that is on ODA basis, official development assistance, and investor-led policy engagement process. They interact because there are, from the international side, there are trade, financial, technical support coming along with that. They are acting according to norms of sustainability and perception of climate and development. But there are also political ideas, etc. So these meet with obviously domestic factors, such as what type of actors and institutions, norms and rules are prevalent in Brazil in the land use sectors, and what are political priorities. Next one, please. So first is that we found in this case study that there are 3 levels that matter for international cooperation, and if these 3 levels are there, then there is what we assume is that there is a solid basis for international cooperation here, that there has to be international agreements, there has to be this element of international climate policy goals formulation, but that also needs to be reflected, just as we heard in the South African case, that there have to be national policy goals and outputs. Here in this case, we are looking at the forest code. But the 3rd level, which is actually not really a level underneath, I hope it's working now.
Yes, we can hear you, Hannah.
Great. So there is one coalition that is fighting for strict implementation of the forest code, and the other one is working against that strict implementation. We call it the weak implementation, and that is, let's say, mostly composed of groups that are doing agribusiness in a more open economy way. They are working through the parliament, and so these 2 coalitions exist, and they are fighting over the terms of implementation. Next one. So I have 2 similar looking slides, but they differ in an important way. What we did was to analyze what role and where in the policy processes these international climate finance actors actually are working, and where they are active. So here on top, we see policy brokers that play an important role in terms of brokering policy decisions. But as mentioned, we are in the process of political struggle around the means of implementation, or terms of implementation. So these 2 groups exist. They work through different streams in the policy processes, and here the ODA type of actor, they work closely with the executive branch of the government. They are kind of disconnected from other fields, other sectors in the government, such as that coalition and the agribusiness industry organized in Congress. So that's particular here. They have a particular role in the executive branch. Next one. It looks different when you look at the right side here. So the figure is similar in terms of structure. You have on top again the policy brokers, and here again you have these 2 streams that we looked at, and these investor policy engagement that are working for advocating to reduce deforestation, because they feel that this is, or they perceive deforestation as a risk for their investment. So they begin to lobby for a stricter implementation of the forest code in Brazil. And so they are working across a wide range of actors and trying to influence, again, also the struggle for the terms of implementation. But they are, as opposed to the executive leaning ODA type of actor, these are working in the problem stream, meaning they are rather bringing attention to the nature of the problem, the magnitude of the problem that they perceive in deforestation. Next one, please. Some conclusions. The first and foremost, which is maybe known for a lot of people, but it comes really very obvious in this case, that the Brazilian forest biomes are having the nature of a global public good. So it's of concern to the globe. But this is not fully shared by the Brazilian government. So policy decisions are, of course, subject to national sovereignty. And as mentioned, the agribusiness lobby is working towards weakening of the forest code, while then again entering the international climate finance actors. We have learned from these two actors that we are looking at that they are inherently political in nature. These two, meaning they would not come as a blank check, climate finance, but come with a package of political ideas, norms, strategies, and sometimes conditions from funders. And remarkable is that we estimate, according to OECD figures, that there's 30% of the Article 9 funding of the Paris Agreement is implemented through these kind of structures. What we also learned is that you need to look at ownership of international climate finance more nuanced. That means that it would be too simple an assumption that there is country ownership and that's it. So what we have seen here is that there are groups and coalitions in the government or working with the government that are pro that type of policy and others are against. So that is leading to or the necessity to have a more nuanced look at ownership and what that entails in terms of, let's say, political negotiations between funders and recipients. Thank you very much. That was the presentation.
Thank you, Henner. Thank you, all the participants. So now we come from discussion. Yeah, if I can ask before that India talk about the just transition, same with the South Africa. Indonesia talk about the climate governance models. South Africa, Brazil and Henner about talk the same about the forest, related to the forest. So please, if you have any question, put on the Q&A, and then also please mention your question about who the presenter is. Okay. There are the question is what the next step for SNAPFI research? What the step will you take to ensure the policy recommendations are concerned national government implemented? So this question is come to, okay. One question is come from Margarita Coronaglia. Thank you for inspiring my presentation and apologies. This question was already answered. I missed the view with yeah. I was wondering what the panelists' view are on the role of voluntary carbon market is driving finance, and what if that collective? Oh, they already answered the question. Sorry. Okay, so I can look. Okay. Yeah. So you didn't mention to whom the question or to all the panelists? Because, and what if the alternative PCM, voluntary carbon market with panelists, I guess? Okay. This question is come to the all panelists. So who will be respond first? Have you any idea about the voluntary carbon market? Manis, Buniken, Andrew, Gustavo, or Henner? Okay.
From our perspective, I think this may be a little bit different in different countries, but I think the scale on first of all, the scale on which this would take place is just way too small to make a significant impression, given the kind of ambition we now have within the next 2 or 3 decades. I mean, the other problem which has been raised by many people about voluntary carbon markets is that we really need, they need to be governed in a way more robust way in order for their emissions reductions to be credible, and they would provide probably only sort of marginal finance for the kind of projects that we would be looking at. And that really isn't going to solve the kind of problems that we have in terms of the transition. There may be a space for them for small-scale projects around the transition, but we're a little skeptical about that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. This is talk about the voluntary carbon market. Maybe Bunikan want to, okay.
Yes, maybe I would add and try to answer in terms of the context in Indonesia. Yeah, I think the voluntary carbon market in Indonesia is not really suitable because yeah, although our study is not the study that I presented is not focusing on carbon market or financing, but we have also some discussion about that. Currently, we are on the formulation of the feed-in tariff, and then also the carbon economy value is ongoing, and it's not yet implemented. But yeah, it has to be regulated first in Indonesia, and although the regulation is already published, but there are still some technicalities that has to be formulated and socialized. And yeah, voluntary in I mean in current situation, I don't yeah, I think more or less quite skeptical also in Indonesia. Maybe that's all that I can discuss on the Indonesian context. Thank you.
Manis or Gustavo? Or yeah, Manis, please.
Well, I share the view that the expectations from voluntary carbon market cannot be high. In any case, the scale of voluntary carbon markets is minuscule compared to the financial needs and requirements. Theoretically, voluntary carbon markets only add to the possible, the expectation from those who want to take risky investments, but there is no guarantee. So there is only going to be a very limited, say, interest and excitement from investors. So only thing you that can change the way people look at the balance sheets of different projects is the compliance market. But compliance market also has to be supported or has to be based on a high level of ambition. Low level of ambition is not going to create any significant dynamism in the market.
Okay, thank you. Gustavo, you want to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just think it's agreeing with what has been said. I mean, I think voluntary carbon markets do have a role to play, but it's the kind of sectors that we're looking at our studies here is the scale of finance that is necessary. Voluntary carbon markets are not going to be able to cover that. They may help in some way or fashion, but the scale requires mandatory carbon markets for that change to actually take place, or some other kind of approaches. But yeah, I think my colleagues were very consistent in the way that they presented the issue. I agree with them.
Okay, thank you. Henry, your carbon market, or you want to answer a question from the Hala, because she said this is very interesting research on your research study. Yeah? There are a lot of questions from him. Maybe you can ask one by one, please.
First, thank you very much for the comment and the questions. So first about the theoretical perspective, yes, we took the pile of theories, I should say, that developed over the years on how countries are cooperating on climate policy internationally. So drawing back on the last work of Elinor Ostrom, polycentrism and cooperation in this regard. And there was then followed by later works, just mentioning some pieces of work from Thomas Hale, for example, on catalytic cooperation and others. So, or Bernstein Kishore, his work on pathways of influence. So that's the body of work that we use there. So the second one is I just agree. I mean, this is one study in one sector, and this will be contrasted with another sector, energy, and we hope to put forward a comparative study by the end of the year, if I'm not too optimistic with the timeline here. So then the last one, what is the definition? For simple reasons, we used the OECD data bank, the DAC, the Development Assistance Committee, that records climate finance. We didn't discuss that much. I know that your question is very good because there's a big debate about what is climate finance, what is it not, you know. So, but here we took this definition of the OECD. Thank you.
Thank you for your very comprehensive answer. Yeah, but Hala also mentioned if some panelists want to add another perception about that. But because in the last time Henner mentioned about the climate finance use definition is from the OECD, probably another panelist has another opinion.
Yeah, a short one. I mean, this is a question that has dogged the discussions in the UNFCCC and now in the Paris Agreement, and I agree completely that it's with those who are trying to develop a more coherent and clearer vision, and this is muddying the waters in terms of what countries need and what has already been delivered. The interesting question now is really that, particularly in the global stocktake, this is being framed in different ways, and this is being contested quite a lot by different parties. Some parties are emphasizing financial flows, which are, you know, as referred to in Article 2(1)(c) of the Paris Agreement, and others are emphasizing climate finance. And the question really is I suppose, drawing a distinction between the kind of investment that we would maybe be able to get on the normal commercial market, and this is increasingly the case for instance, private participation in renewable energy markets, but that very frequently requires in developing countries infrastructure support and a whole range of other supporting measures, including technical assistance to set up appropriate market structures, etc. And all of those things, I think, require public finance. And that, I think, given where we are now and given the kind of scale at which we'll have to look at all of this, it would be a very good time actually to talk more precisely about this. I think the reason why we use the OECD DAC is simply because it's there, and there isn't another system that has that kind of comprehensive data set. But the problem with the DAC is that its categorizations are quite vague. And so if you look at under the hood of what climate finance is classified by different OECD countries, it varies enormously. So it's not it's kind of useful in that it's there, but it's very short of what we actually require. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So that means there are still a lot of room for to do so. Yeah. Other panelists want to add or to give some other comment about the the question is actually sorry, it is this one. Yeah, about the definition about FPCC, about COP, something like that. Okay. Okay, this is because we are now the last year of the SNAPFI research. Yeah, so probably what's the next step? Yeah, from the our each country, and then because we a lot of study, and then who will be the policy recommendation you will be delivered from the result of the study. So if anyone has any idea to answer to more explore the result of the study, especially how to make integration climate finance in national policy, something like that, based on your study. Yeah, Manis, please.
Well, of course, there is a standard practice of outreach after a report is done. We want to present it to different stakeholders and present at different platforms and so on. But that is obviously within the project lifetime. But to take it forward, what we learned the most in last 4 years while conducting the research is that ultimately implementation is a multi-stakeholder engagement process. When it comes to mobilizing and disbursing finance, what we found that those who would need finance, who would use finance, and those who would provide finance, they do not normally speak in the same language. They don't, their expectations are different. Their risk-taking behavior is sometimes different. And that is not properly known to each other. And that then creates kind of this vacuum within the decision-making process. There is an information asymmetry among the banking sector players as well as the industry players. And at times, although governments normally usually have significant convening power, but many a times that also may not be, foolproof to be able to gather all kinds of views and visions together. So it is important to have these conversations regularized. And this is something that we are starting to, working with and talking to industry players as well as people in the financial sector and setting a kind of a long-term dialogue group. And we hope that these insights and more questions that we have raised through these studies, not only the studies that are focused on India, but also the other studies that have been presented here. Those questions are further deliberated in these platforms. So we hope that this knowledge becomes instrument of capacity building of those participants in those regular dialogues, but also taken forward as further consultative process towards policy making and also informing negotiation process, hopefully.
Anyone to ask? Okay, Anna, please.
I think on a slightly more general level, I think what should come next and what are the recommendations coming out of this work is that I think it's worthwhile noting that much of that international climate finance is indeed flowing through systems and institutions of official development assistance. And because that's the systems that are there that funders can use and that have been there since decades. And I think that an overarching recommendation would be to revise carefully if these systems are still useful, if they are effective enough to deliver, if they allow for enough consultation and dialogue and negotiation between parties. According to my opinion, not always. There has to be fresh thinking also outside the box, what approaches are needed to cooperate on climate policy. I think there's too much sensitivity, and somehow it seems to me that there is a slightly like a veil hanging over this business, and I think that this needs to be also lifted and carefully discussed about what remains in terms of usefulness and where a new approach is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone to ask, or also to the participant, if you want to talk directly with the panelists, you can raise hand, and yeah, to whom your question will be delivered. Yeah, we still have time, about 10 minutes before we finish. Unika, want to add? Okay, please.
Yes, I would like to add what Manish and Heiner already stated regarding the next step, other than what they've already said about outreach. Of course, the policy recommendations is something that we developed from the studies, and it's not always an easy recommendation to be implemented. However, along the way, based on the journey of this 4 years study, we have developed networks regarding the experts and also the policymakers in each field. And also, since the beginning of the study, we already stated the partner of our research within the ministries, and we regularly updated them about the findings and also the recommendation that we proposed to them. Yeah, of course, it's not an easy task, but we have already seen something or spotted by the policymakers. For example, we were invited to give inputs to the New and Renewable Energy Act that been formulated by the government. And yeah, hopefully next, I agree that we have to stay close with our partners and our experts and network in the future. I think that's my additional opinion.
Thank you, Andrew, because you mentioned about the GTP and implementation. So what's current situation of the GTP implementation?
As I was saying, we do have a JET investment, jet investment plan, I should say, which starts off from where we are now in terms of policy, and then tries to expand what would be necessary in order to both meet South Africa's NDC target in an ambitious way. And as any of you who have looked at it will know, there's a range which is based on a number of different factors. Whether in fact at this point that is what is possible given where we are in terms of investment, etc., we're continually updating that. There are different policy strands in the JET IP, and I think that they're going all of these need to effectively be implemented, and there's quite a lot of institutional change going on at the moment in South Africa in these areas. So there's a major process going on to reform the electricity sector. There's a draft piece of legislation which makes some very widespread changes to the electricity sector. There's a process going on to resolve the financial crisis in our state utility, which is almost complete, which will allow first of all, it'll separate the utility into 3 different independent entities, and the transmission and system operator entity will then be able to make the kinds of investments that we're expecting will be necessary to get the sort of resources onto the grid that we will need to stick to that ambitious pathway. Then on top of that, our Department of Trade and Industry is developing a set of industrial policies around localization for renewable energy supply infrastructure. And we're also looking at localization for transmission infrastructure, because there are bottlenecks around that, and that's going to be one of the main issues we're going to have to address. And then also particularly on electric vehicles, which is included in the JET IP. South Africa has a long-standing industrial policy on supporting the car manufacturing sector in the country, and the idea is really to try to shift that whole sector to electric mobility. That will in turn provide vehicles that are affordable enough in South Africa to undertake that transition to electric mobility as on the timetable that we have laid out for that. So for the moment, that's where we are. We still have a much bigger challenge ahead of us, which is the gap between the JET IP's assessment that came out of last year's technical analysis by the JET task force, is that we have roughly 1/12 of the finance that will be necessary from the current JET-P. And that is a huge problem that will be replicated across developing countries in the light of the necessity to increase our mitigation targets to stay on the 1.5-degree track. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Finally, we come to the end of our webinar. We had a productive discussion about the SNAPFI Platter, although this is the last year of our SNAPFI project, but we hope we can continue with the other activity. With thanks to all presenters, very nice discussion and then very productive about talk in each country study. Also, thanks to the participants for the question and how to improve the next activity. We hope this study can have a meaningful impact on all participants by providing an overview of the gap between climate finance and the implementation in national climate change in each country, and also development policies from the perspective of developed and developing country, developed country under HENAR perception, and then developed country of our country. Please feel free to visit SNAPFI website to get the detail of our report. And again, thank you for your attending, and then have a good day. Good night from Indonesia.